Great. Okay. Right. So as I was saying, ask your topic হচ্ছে গিয়ে how to read scientific papers or technical papers. Um, so scientific reading process is different from reading other materials, right? So if you're reading um, a textbook, for example, it's not a linear process. তুমি একটা chapter পড়ো, it's meant to be read sequentially, but let's say you read a chapter and then you go back to some other chapter, right? And then you come back to this chapter again. Um, Similarly, scientific reading it's not a linear process. It's a non-linear process, and it's meant to be read in a different way than reading a novel, for example. যেখানে it builds up a story, and you're meant to read sequentially, page after page. The scientific articles are written in a different way than other texts, and that's why the reading process is also different, right? Great. Okay, so that's the overview. আচ্ছা, এখন um, a common question or common confusion with people who are just starting with reading scientific papers is that um, you hear all these terms: peer review, and then scholarly articles, and then um, conference proceedings, অথবা theses, dissertation. What are they? এগুলো কি জিনিস? আচ্ছা, so there are mainly two types of publications, right? There is one that's scholarly publication. The common term is journal articles or journal papers. So what are they? They are written by experts in a particular field, and the target audience is also other experts in that field, right? So if let's say a faculty member in my university publishes a paper, that would be a scholarly article. They make heavy use of technical terms. They make heavy use of scholarly language that are specific to that field. So it's not meant for the general public. And of course, it builds up on work that was done previously. So they have a huge collection of sources they have used. So আমার professor একটা paper লিখলো, তার advisor কোনো একটা paper কে cite করলো. So this citation is it's collection of citations is called bibliography. So it has a huge list of other papers that it has built up on. Shop scholarly publication peer reviewed na, but most of them are, and that's something you should note. But for all intents and purposes, all scholarly work is peer reviewed. And of course, when you're reading a scientific or a scholarly publication, you are expected to have prior knowledge about that field. And the main purpose of a scholarly publication is to report facts with supporting evidence, and that's what it does. Acha. Erpore there are the other type of literature. So একটা হলো scholarly literature, একটা হচ্ছে কি popular literature. So when you're applying, a lot of a very common mistake that I've seen high schoolers do is confuse the two. যখন বলে যে we have a paper, they sometimes write something that falls in this popular sources genre. What do I mean by that? ধরো কেউ লিখলো some article and it's pseudoscience at best. So they cite Wikipedia or they cite some other non-citable sources. ধরো Popular Mechanics এর একটা magazine এর একটা chapter কে cite করবে. That's not really a citable source. That's not authentic scholarly publication that you can cite. So what is popular? What are popular sources? It's newspaper articles, magazines, articles that you read online. That doesn't go through that peer evaluation process, peer review process. It's written by journalists or professional writers. Sometimes it's also written by professional or trained scientists or engineers or whatever. They are written by skilled experts, but they're not meant for the rest of the academic community. It's meant for the general public. So it's really toned down, কোনো technical term use করবে না, and it's digestible, right?
Sometimes it's also written by just, people who are just trying to fill their magazine with, or their newspaper with, like a scientific angle. And something that I've seen, especially for bio related like news, is that they put down their own interpretation of it, and that's often not accurate. Like when they write it, I'm like, what did you write? This doesn't even make sense. So which is why sometimes these are good. Sometimes it's good for you to just get a very cursory glance about a certain topic, but this should definitely not be your source of knowledge or your source of information if you're ever citing it or if you're trying to actually know what research has been done on it.
So the other thing that you should note is that popular articles are written for the general audience. So it's written in a language that's easy to understand. It doesn't use any of those technical terms or scientific terms. They rarely have a bibliography, so they rarely cite other papers or other articles. Maঝে মাঝে করে, but most of the time they করে না. They're not usually fact checked. But sorry, they're not usually peer reviewed. They are fact checked by the editorial board of the publishing agency, which can be the magazine or newspaper agency or whatever is publishing. And of course, it assumes, because it's intended for the general audience, right? It assumes zero knowledge of a subject area. আচ্ছা, আর যেমন সৈতি বললো একটু আগে, it may contain an argument or opinion of the author. So it's not really reporting facts or with supporting evidence. It's an opinion in this. It represents the opinion of the author. আচ্ছা, so high school level, it's an excellent source of information, right? Popular sources like newspaper and magazines are good sources of information because they're digestible and it's written in a way that's appealing to everyone. So it's a good source of information. They are not reliable sources for scientific research. So if you're trying to write a paper, and high school level people do, if you're trying to do that, this is not a good source of information. Right, okay. Acha, এখন তো গেল, so we have made the distinction between scholarly publication and popular publications. So scholarly publication এর মধ্যেও there are different types, right? So the overarching types or bins you can put them in are primary literature sources and secondary literature. So what do I mean by that? Primary literature হচ্ছে it's the cutting edge. It's একদম current research in this field. That's what it represents. It represents original research work, right? So one of the main criteria of primary research, or one of the main type of primary research, is peer-reviewed journal articles. So what are they? Achha. So let me bring up my notes because I've written down some stuff. Right. Okay. So peer-reviewed journal articles, we have this is the type of or this is what we mean by when we say paper. This is what we're referring to. Conference proceedings হচ্ছে গিয়ে, there are compilation of papers and research and information presented at different conferences. So it's a collection of multiple papers, and they are sometimes peer-reviewed, but it's often the case that it's the first publication for a particular project. So dhoro, I'm working on this project and I'm just getting started. Let's say I have some data which is not enough for a paper, but it's enough for a poster or something of that nature. So I'm at a conference, I present my poster, and then before I register for the conference or before I want to go to the conference, they can ask you to submit an abstract or a 2-page document or a 3-page document. ওই 2-3 পেজের ডকুমেন্ট সেগুলো হচ্ছে গিয়ে counts as your conference paper or your conference paper, right? So that's part of the conference proceedings. Those are sometimes peer reviewed. Most অনেক ক্ষেত্রে এটা হয় না, but they are sometimes peer reviewed, and they can count towards your peer reviewed journal publication. But it's definitely part of the primary literature because it represents your original work, the original work that you have done. Great. Okay. Right. So eçharaও was a government document. So let's say NASA is working on this project with a bunch of people from JPL, which is very common in the space related industries, defense industries. It's could be common because all the contracts are done by the government, and the research is also very strictly regulated. So government document যখন declassify করে, when it's available to the public, you can access them. And those government documents are also primary literature because they represent original work that was done by that team in that federal agency. Right. So the purpose of the government document is to disseminate information to the general public. It can contain data, stats, consumer information, transcripts of hearings. যদি একটা কোনো controversial project থাকে, if there are hearings geared around it, it can represent. It can contain the transcripts of those hearings and etc. It's a lot of technical and scientific and social documents. The government document. Acha, এছাড়াও finally there is this thesis and dissertation. So whenever a grad student is working towards something, so masters or a PhD, in fact in some cases undergrads also have their thesis and dissertation, but grad students need to complete a thesis or need to write a thesis at the end of their PhD, and that is a type of primary literature because it represents original work that was done by this grad student. এছাড়াও the other type of other bin that we can categorize scholarly publication in is secondary literature. Secondary literature কি when you're not doing original work. So ধরো আমি নিজে কোনো research করতেছি না, I'm just compiling a list of other people's work and publishing that in a textbook, right? So textbooks are an example of secondary literature. এছাড়াও আছে encyclopedia or reference material যেমন technical dictionary, engineering dictionary, mathematical dictionary, কত ধরনের dictionary আছে, those are secondary literature. Okay, good. So I'm moving a little fast because অনেকগুলো slide, but stop me if there are questions. Why do we even bother reading scientific articles, right? That's a question because textbook থেকে তো সব information পাওয়া যায়, right? So why do we bother reading scientific articles? It's because textbooks are out of date. So by the time you compile all this list, 10, 20 বছর, 50 বছর, 100 বছরের কাজ শুরু করে, সে ধরো একটা ফিজিক্সের টেক্সটবুক খুললা, সে নিউটন থেকে শুরু করে লাগরাঞ্জ পর্যন্ত আছে. That's like 300 years of work. Of course, by the time Newton died, Newton's work wasn't published in a textbook, right? So but it was published in a paper. So scholarly publications, they represent the current work, the state of the art work that's being done in that field. And textbooks are severely out of date by the time they are published. Right, so that's relevance. এছাড়াও আছে replication. So any journal article or any scholarly publication or good scholarly publications should have all the data, all the parameters, all the data set, all the stats and everything that you need to replicate or to reproduce the results from that paper. So if you make a claim, যে আমার এই experiment করছে, এটা biological experiment, আমার এই data আসছে, and this is the data that I got. Someone, let's say with some biology knowledge should be able to get that data and then reproduce that I should get the exact same data result that you got, right? That's replication. Our third, but probably the most important one is it's to ask this question, do you believe it or not? I have this data set, I make this conclusion. There's this thing in science that people talk about a lot. Your data can be really off. Your data can be wrong, but as long as you're convincing, you're good. The main purpose of having all this data set is to make that statement. I'm leading to believe that this happened. So that's the purpose of scholarly publication, is to ask this question whether you believe it or not. They provide the author's conclusion, and the purpose of the reader is to see that conclusion, see the data set, and see all the supporting arguments, and make that decision. Should I believe this conclusion or not? Right? Okay, so that answers the question why we need to read scientific articles. Let's ask the question how to read them. So this is getting into the details of it. So this is not my this is what I tend to follow when I'm reading scientific articles, but this is what I was taught to. I took a class on this, and this is what I was taught how to read scientific articles. It's a 4-stage process. It's the first stage is skim, second is to read, interpret, and summarize. এগুলো মানে কি? এগুলো মানে হচ্ছে গিয়ে পরের স্লাইডে. So the first step is skimming. So skim মানে কি? Skim মানে হচ্ছে গিয়ে you want to get the big picture of that paper. So you don't read the whole paper, you don't read it word by word. So what you do is let's say I'm given a paper, you look at the title থেকে কি বুঝতেছো ওইটা একটা দেখলা, তারপর you look at the keywords. So I don't know if it's true for all papers, all journals, but most journals have a keywords line যেখানে ও বলবে যে এই পেপারটা এই জিনিস নিয়ে ডিল করতেছে. So we'll see an example of a Nature article in the very end, but keywords নিয়ে ডিল করতেছে, so এই পেপারটা এই জিনিসের উপর ফোকাস করতেছে. So that's something you look at. So title, keywords, and the third and perhaps the most important is the abstract. So প্রতিটা পেপারে, প্রতিটা journal পেপারে একটা abstract থাকে. You look at the abstract and you try to see, so abstract কি থাকে, abstract বলা থাকে যে ও আমরা এটা করছি, আমরা এই কোয়েশ্চেন অ্যানসার করার চেষ্টা করতেছি, আমরা এইভাবে এই জিনিস করছি, and this is what we found. খুব শর্টে পুরো পেপারটা একটা সামারি,
like 200 words usually, right?
হ্যাঁ,
Abstract.
200 words. It's very short and it's very digestible. So you read the title, the keywords in the abstract, and you try to get the big picture of the paper from those. এছাড়াও you look at the headings and the subheadings. So প্রতিটা section এর a title থাকে, right? Or if there is no title, you look at the first sentence of the paragraph of the paragraphs of the different sections in the paper, and then you try to figure out যে আচ্ছা এই প্যারাগ্রাফ এটা নিয়ে কথা বলছে, বা এই টাইটেল সাব হেডিং করে দেখলা যে এই সেকশনে এটা নিয়ে কথা বলছে. But then you also know the publishing date, right? Publication date. Why is that important? Because some fields যেগুলো খুব কাটিং এজ কাজ করতেছে, for example, I don't know, let's say computer science, সেখানে the recent work really is not relevant anymore because things are continuously changing. So relevance is a key issue, and you look at the publishing date to figure out whether this is relevant to the current field or not. কারণ ধরো 50 বছর আগের কাজ, someone might have contradicted it, and someone might have said that okay, this is not what it used to be, now we are thinking about this in a different way, right? এছাড়াও if there are any terms in the three steps that we did so far, so big picture, heading and subheading, and publishing did not really, but এই পর্যন্ত পড়ে তোমার যদি কোনো term you don't understand, you note it down on a piece of paper, right? Great. So that's the skimming stage. আচ্ছা, reread হচ্ছে গিয়ে the most time consuming one. So what do you exactly do there? So এখানে প্রথম স্টেপ হচ্ছে গিয়ে you define the problem. So you answer this question, what was this study trying to do? So এই পুরো পেপারটার পারপাসটা কি? What were the scientists trying to do, or what were these engineers trying to do? So you define the problem, right? Second part hocche motivation for this research. So obviously something led this scientists or engineers to ask some question, right? And that's what led them to spend years trying to come up with this research work. So what was the motivation for their work? Why was this work worth doing, and why should this result interest the readers other than the scientists themselves? So এই দুইটা কোয়েশ্চেনের অ্যানসার করতে পারলে you define the motivation for this research. So this can include statements like আমরা এই ফিল্ডে এই বিষয়ে আগে অনেকে কাজ করছে, and this is where they lack, this is what they could not verify, or this is what they could not prove, or this is what was wrong with their experiment, and this is where we picked up from, this is where we started working from, and this is our motivation for the research, right? So once you define the problem and the motivation for this research, next comes the central result. So a paper, what's the main claim, or what's the main result from this paper, right? So that's important, and that's what you need in a single sentence, or in two sentences. You should identify what this study claimed to have solved, right? Acha. Fourth point হচ্ছে evidence analysis. So এই যে একবার তুমি once you identify the central claim or central result, you should also identify the supporting evidence or supporting analysis that these people do to support that claim, right? So কি ধরনের data collect করছে, কি করে collect করছে, কি করে analyze করছে, how do they support or fail to support the articles, the main central claim. Okay, good. এছাড়া আছে হচ্ছে গিয়ে reproducibility or reliability. So এই যে claimটা, and this claim comes with all the supporting evidence. How confident are the scientists that someone else can also reproduce or replicate these results? So how reliable are their observations, or what are the main sources of uncertainty? ধরো একটা গ্রাফ আছে, গ্রাফটাকে মানে try to criticize every single piece of evidence or supporting document that these people give in a paper. That's the key. As a reader, that's your job, right? So তোমার যদি মনে হয় যে না এখানে কোনো একটা aspect or ignore করছে, right? So let's say they're measuring the velocity of a block sliding on a surface, and they ignore friction, right? That's stupid. You can't do that. So if you think that okay, can I data publish for say at a velocity curve and they ignore friction, so you're like, okay, why did they ignore friction? That's a loophole. That's a problem with their paper. So that's, you note that down. So perhaps the most important part of reading a paper is to identify where this paper fails, or what the drawbacks are. As important as it is to absorb all the highlights of that research paper, it's also very important to identify where they went wrong. So that's the reread process. That's the most time consuming one. Airport actually interpret. So now you're getting into the details of it, right? So once you have a clear idea of where things are and কি করতেছে বা কোথায় সমস্যা আছে, কোথায় সমস্যা নাই, now you go into the details of it. So there could be equations, there could be derivations, mathematical proofs, graphs and figures, depending on what field you're in. So now you go into these graphs and figures and proofs and try to determine or try to understand the results, right? So ধরো graph থাকলে you try to, before you even read the caption, you try to understand, okay, এই গ্রাফটা এরকম হইতেছে, it's a y versus x graph. What is this trying to convey? What is the result that what is the interpretation I should get from seeing this graph, right? So that's one thing. এছাড়াও আছে হচ্ছে গিয়ে discussion and result section. So it's always there. Discussion results is always there. So you look at that section, and then you try to discussion and result section, they sort of summarize what they did in the paper, right? It's more like a summary of the whole paper and the key highlights from this paper, the key important key factors or key points in this paper. So you read that section, and then again you highlight areas where the authors did a good job and the areas where they did not. So এর মধ্যে যদি মনে করো যে, so in most papers the authors what they tend to do is আমরা এটা করছি, এটা আমাদের limitation. So they also identify the limitations, but if there is something more that you think they're missing, note that down. And a stage, if you think that you have not extracted the main points, you go back and look over the text again, right? So this makes the process non-linear. So it's not a linear process. You're constantly going back and forth between sections and trying to understand the papers and then fit everything together. Acha, last stage, which is summarize. So this is more like a continuous step for the whole process. So as you're going through all these steps, you take notes, you identify the things that you were supposed to identify. So in the last 3 steps, you take notes on it. What I've particularly found useful is annotating the papers themselves. So if you're reading things on a computer screen, I would suggest either printing it, which is not my first option because you're killing trees. So the second option would be getting hold of an iPad, which I also understand it's very expensive, right? So যদি দুইটার মধ্যে একটা চুজ করতে হয়, and if you can afford the latter, then go for the first one. Print the document, and then ওখানে sticky notes বা marker অথবা pen দিয়ে যেভাবে খুশি just scribble all over the paper. The more you scribble, the better your understanding is. So studies have shown that the more writing you do when you're reading, the more you absorb the material, right?
So I don't
Um,
want to kill trees and I don't have an iPad either. So what I do is for each paper, I have this running Google Doc, which is like my literature Google Doc, where I read it and things I like, I write down about the paper, or things I find remarkable, write down about the paper. And sometimes I'm like, you'll see me being like, question mark, like, what the hell did they do? I don't understand this. And then when I go back and look at the document, I can not only remember all the papers I've read, I can also remember the key things that, you know, I liked or disliked about the paper. And if any of you ever go into grad school, I think like in the last week alone, I had to read like over 40 plus papers because I have an upcoming presentation tomorrow. But that doesn't happen like on a regular basis, but it's very important that you get in the habit of writing and documenting what you read, because as soon as you close that PDF of the paper, you'll forget, you're bound to forget what they did. So I think that is very helpful for me.
so আরেকটা জিনিস I will just add here, অনেক সময় যেটা হয় সেটা হচ্ছে, if you have these three, or for a single paper, if you have two documents, one the PDF, the actual paper, and Shweti's version of taking notes, which is a Google Doc or something else. So like once you segregate the two, it's hard for some people to link it back, unless you're very, very careful about how you organize those notes, right? So অনেক সময় হয় কি, let's say I'm reading this passage, and then I'm looking at this line, and the previous line is already there, right? So there's a constant flow of thoughts. I mean, I'm at a line of focus করতেছি, and I'm a line to response, আমি এটা কোনো একটা জিনিস লিখলাম or documented, but I forget that in my mind the previous line is already there. Subconsciously, I'm also thinking about the previous line. So once I close that PDF, and like 5 days later, if I look at the Google Doc, I won't have the previous line in my head, right? But I've only written a response considering the next line. So তখন it's hard to link, oh, why the hell did I write this? So then you go back to this document and read the whole thing again. That's a waste of time. Unless you're very careful how you organize your thoughts, in the Google Doc or whatever additional document you're using, it becomes hard to keep track of your thoughts. So make sure you do that. Make sure you are careful about organizing your thoughts when you're using a secondary document. Good. I think we are on time. Okay. So we have 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So we have this document, or we have this very short Nature article.
Before
So
you move on, can I talk about like some things that I've seen
yeah,
in
sure.
the past? Okay. So I would just like to talk about, first of all, a few things. So I know many of you, when you apply, it's very natural for you to want to impress the admissions committee. Recently, I've had one person send me a paper that they wrote, but this person clearly did not have any idea of how papers work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and it's not their fault. At their age, I didn't know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how papers work, right? So first of all, to publish a paper, an original research article, you have to be working with a professor, even a professor who works in the field. And even if you're trying to, so papers are of different types. I don't remember if Amman mentioned this, but there's original research article where you do experiments, you summarize the data and you write a paper about it. And there are review papers. What are review papers? Review papers compile many, many different papers that have been written before, on the same topic, and summarize all their findings and make a comment about where we are at and what needs to be done next, right? So review papers are very welcome in any field. If you're someone who is starting to, for example, you just want to know about a particular field, you're a high school student, you don't know much about anything, review paper is a great place to start to get to know a field, because the review paper talks about so many different separate, like it talks about like 50 papers in that field. So then you can read the review paper, you can go through each of the papers mentioned in the review paper, and that will give you a good start on where to start, you know. Okay, so that's a good way. So as a high school student, what options of publishing is available to you? I would say it's very limited. You usually have to be working with a professor who has a PhD, to be publishing anywhere, be it in a Bangladeshi journal or in an international journal, doesn't matter. Samia, about the topic choosing of a paper, is that what you're asking? Have we already? Okay. So, well, this is more about learning to read a paper. I would advise, if you don't have a paper already, if you have no research experience, if you've never worked under a professor, I would say do not submit a paper. Do not try to hint that you've written papers. Do not try to get them to read your papers, because as a high school student without a professor's supervision, it's not feasible that you'll be able to write a paper that is good. And just by, if you just send them like a paper, a thing that you wrote, that can hurt your application more than it will help it, because that's so it's just so out of the blue. It is pseudoscience because it's not based on experiments. And so, but what you can do is you can develop a habit of reading at this point, so what you can do experiments, you can learn about what experiments are others doing. So the point of this workshop is to basically get you to start reading a paper, or help you to find like papers on a particular topic. As high school students, it's also going to be pretty difficult for you to find any papers that are published in big journals, because you don't have access to them. Being university students, we have open access to almost every journal in the world, but you will not. So in that way, what you have to do is basically, sitting in Bangladesh, you may have to request in, for example, in a Facebook group or Bangladeshis Beyond Border or like Higher Study Abroad, that I'm looking for this particular paper. I want to study this. Can you please send me a PDF? And then someone, like lots of people have access to that, they can send you that PDF, but you wouldn't have access to it. So I would advise against writing a research paper, or especially a science research paper. If you want to write a paper about something, if you want to write a creative writing paper, that's okay. If you want to have a science blog, that's okay. But make sure you say that it's a science blog, it's popular science. Do not try to tell the admissions committee that you've written a paper if you have never worked with a professor in a lab. Google Scholar is good, Rubaiyat. Google Scholar kind of sums up like what one person, so you look up a name, that person's, all notable publications will come up. But the thing with Google Scholar is you can only see like maybe 1 or 2 pages of like a particular document. You can't see the whole document. So
no, you can't see anything about the document. So the thing with Google Scholar is, let's say you publish a paper and sometimes you have a link to an online presence for that paper. So that's attached to the Google Scholar. Unless you have access to that online portal, it doesn't help you anyway, right? So Google Scholar mode paper thake na. It's just your profile as a researcher.
So if you even write a textbook, that will also show up on a Google Scholar. And I think for textbooks, you can actually see like 1 or 2 pages in the middle of the textbook.
Google Books. That's not.
Oh, that's Google Books. Okay. Yeah. All right, so let's try and read a paper.
Science Hub use kora jai. Right? These are all. Is Science Hub, does it have papers? I mean, can you access?
Science Hub or Science Direct?
All right. Science Hub is a website that provides free access to millions of research papers and books without regard to copyright. Okay. Yes,
yeah, sure. Use Science Hub, but you may not find all the papers there, like maybe some. So.
Basically, yes. We can just say that on record, and that's the problem.
Yeah, they're a little illegal, so that's okay. But that's okay. I mean, that's okay in the sense that you as high school students don't have any other options if you want to, it's not feasible for you to get a subscription to like hundreds of journals.
Your school probably have free access to
it. But the other thing that I'm really gonna, before you use Science Hub, because that's a little illegal and like it's copyright infringement, another thing you can try is to email the author, be like, I am a high school student, I'm interested in reading your paper. I do not have access to this journal. Can you please send me a copy? And people are really nice and they'll actually send you the author's PDF copy of it.
That's a good one. আরেকটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে there is a thing called Cornell Archive, right? Archive যেটা commonly known as archive. I'll just send a link. But ওখানে you get preprints of papers, right? So what is preprint? So ধরো আমি একটা paper লিখলাম আজকে and I want to publish it. Publishing takes a lot of time. And ওই publication date আগে I can put it on archive so that no one beats me to the chase. Let's say I'm working on this thing, it's a very hot field, অনেকজন কাজ করতেছে, and if someone beats me to it, then I can't publish it anymore. So I put it on preprint website called archive. ওখানে থাকলে পরে I reserve my spot in the community. So I've worked this out. It's in publication, it's in the works, and people can access it. So archive is free, and a lot of papers are put there, preprint version, which means that যখন এই peer review হওয়ার পর যে কমেন্টটা ফিডব্যাকটা পড়ে you correct certain things and then you send it back to the journal again and they publish it. So এই প্রসেসটার আগের ভার্সনটা, so the draft version is put on archive. So there are, in most cases, there are very minute or very small changes between the preprint version and the actual paper. But you can get the preprint version for free without any copyright infringement at preprint. And Shweti will probably talk about the bio version of archive, which is bioarchive. So archive is more for mathematics and then physics. I don't know if there's chemistry, engineering, a lot of engineering papers out there. So archive is for those. A bioarchive is probably just bio.
But one thing to be very careful about is that all these preprint papers, they are not peer reviewed, right? So sometimes what happens, even our lab, like even last month, we tried to submit a paper to a journal and they rejected it, right? And our lab is a lab from Yale. Our advisor is, pretty well known in the field. Despite that, papers get rejected because they feel like something is missing in that paper, right? So it's a very, very rigorous process. So given that it's a preprint, that means that it hasn't been through that rigorous process. It means that you should not probably trust it unless you recognize one of the authors. So if a paper has many author names, the first author name is the main graduate student or postdoc working on that paper, and the last name is usually the PI's name, the PI who is writing the whole the PI whose grant these people are on, the PI whose research group this is. So sometimes you tend to develop a trust towards a particular research group, like that research group is very rigorous. Even if this is a preprint, we can trust their work. Yeah, exactly. That PI is the supervisor. So yeah, you can look at preprints. That's a great way of reading like free.
Okay, so let's move.
Yeah.
How much of that?
Let's
So I'll just share my screen again. So the task is you read this paper, which is attached to that. So I just sent a link. So I've uploaded this on Drive. Wally will answer the question at the end, okay? So I've uploaded the link to this paper in the chat, which I'll post again because it got lost in the questions. Here. So this is the paper. তারপর sorry, that's the slide. That's the slide. Slide deck কেন এখানে ইয়ে করতেছি because read the slide on the skim and read it section just so you know what you're supposed to do. Our paperটা হচ্ছে এখানে, right? তারপর finally, as you go through that process of skimming and rereading, you go into idea boards and then you put down your thoughts. Can you see if you can access it, right? Okay, I can access it. Okay, that's the slide.
I haven't also read this paper. Actually, I'll read it.
We can demonstrate the work again. Just make sure you read the slides on skimming and rereading and work through whatever you can. We won't be able to demonstrate the work because we don't have enough time, but just work through it and we'll have comments at the end. We'll see what everyone does. So I can tell you what you need to focus on. সেটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে এই যে if you go through that slide link, এইখানে এই স্লাইডটা. So what is skimming? Skimming এর যে পার্টগুলো আছে, you make sure you go through all of these steps. The next step is rereading. So make sure you answer all of these questions. Let's do it for like 10 minutes, which is not enough time, but let's just give you 10 minutes and or maybe 15 minutes. So we got some good responses on skimming. Spend about 4 more minutes on skimming and then move on to the rereading step if you're not done with skimming yet.
Pretty nice.
If you're still working on skimming, stop skimming, move on to the rereading section. Make sure you try to focus also on where they failed or where they could do better. A lot of good points. Do you want to work on it for 2 more minutes, or should we just move on to the review? Should we just move on to the review, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so great work. Let's talk about some of the responses we got, right? And then I can tell you my thoughts on the paper. So I'll just put it on the side. Okay, so share screen. Good. Okay, so let's go through this one by one. So I really like this one. It pretty much summarizes the overarching goal of this paper. It's about some hormonal change in male elephants, which facilitates social interaction. That sort of summarizes everything. Um, how elephants get involved in social interaction through circulation. Okay, that's the main idea is there. It's good. Um, how elephant এটা কি আমার screen আসে নাই but নাকি that's it.
No, I think that's it.
Okay, so
We
let's delete
started
that.
and never finished.
Okay, so different odor secretion in males of different maturity. Good. Differential odor secretion. That's good. That's a key idea of the paper. They have conducted an experiment on the elephants of Lake Baikal on their hormonal changes. Right, right. That's good. But the reason I don't like this one as much as the others is because it doesn't get the main point across, right? The main point is the difference in social interaction based on some secretion by the elephants. So, আমি কিন্তু ভালো এই সম্পর্কে কিছু জানি না। হ্যাঁ, if I mess up some terms, forgive me, but this is my understanding of the paper. So let's keep going. Last tells you how the behavior of an elephant is related to the secretion of hormones. Perfect. Yes. So this is what was missing in this response, right? Um, they did conduct an experiments on elephants, but that's not what the purpose of the paper was. Good. Okay, so skimming it, I think most people got the idea what the paper was about. Um, what I would have liked more is if you followed that algorithmic approach. You know the title, keywords, abstract, abstract nine, but like the general idea. This is probably what counts as your idea from the abstract.
Mhm.
So you have gotten the big picture from the abstract. That's what you did. Title was a bad title for a scientific paper for this one, but I really liked it. It's note করো যে প্রতিটা word হচ্ছে M দিয়ে শুরু হয়. So it's what's called alliteration. It was a very poetic way of starting a paper. But anyways, so it was good. Good job on skimming. I like most of the responses. So rereading, that's the more intense step. So kind of problem definition as a motivation as a central result, evidence analysis, reproducibility. Let's see if all of you have gotten most of that. Okay, so the first one, use gas chromatography and mass spectroscopy as analysis techniques. So that covers analysis. Good. Right? So evidence analysis, it again said, knowledge can be used to deter elephants from damaging crops and wandering into human territory. So that would count as, I guess, not really motivation, but rather the goal, the what you want to happen. এটা নিয়ে আমার একটা criticism আছে সেটা আমি পরে আসতেছি, but this is a good, this is what they claim in the paper, right? So immature elephants had secretion analogous to honeybees. Good, but that's right, but that's okay, sure, yes, that's true. Okay, good. The mature elephants have secretion similar to pheromones of bark beetles. True. The secretion of elephant between living in deep water and shallow water is different. Okay. Inspiration behind this research came from ancient Indian poetry. That is, while they mention that it's true, that's not really the motivation for the research, right? It's sort of an inspiration for this research. So that doesn't fall into, when you're taking notes, you don't want to include details that are irrelevant. So this is one of those details that's irrelevant. It's not really a motivation for this research. That's how I would put it. Limitations: they only tested harvested odor from elephants. To use it as a deterrent, the chemical might have been produced synthetically. Let's hold on to that thought. I have thoughts on this, and I like this idea, and I know what you're trying to go for. I mean, I'll give feedback on both of these together. Most crop riding wild animals are male elephant during must. Okay, so all right, so let's talk about these two, right? What I don't like about one of the claims they make in the paper is that conclusion is just bole je oh amra eta use kore we use this idea to prevent animal and human conflicts, so elephants and human conflicts. How they do it is not very clear to the reader. As you are getting across, they are talking about, they're just analyzing odors or secretions from elephants and saying that there's a difference in how elephants perceive those odors, or young elephants honey like more innocent and more soothing একটা smell, or when the elephant grows older it's more aggressive, they ward off other elephants. And the author is trying to use that idea to prevent animal and human conflicts, but it's not clear how. So like you mentioned, there has to be some way of synthesizing or synthetic odor create করার একটা উপায় থাকতে হবে, which they haven't really gotten into. They haven't even touched it. They haven't even scratched the surface. They're like, আমরা এটা use করে will prevent. So বড় একটা jump, and it's not clear what they do in the middle, or even if this is possible. So এই ধরনের far-fetched idea, that was a very, very good limitation that you mentioned here. So this is exactly what I was trying to go for. So এই জন্যে এইখানে the fact that you wrote this, I don't quite think it fits into your. So this would be one of the criticisms for the paper, right? Okay, so that's an interesting thought. It is a motivation. It is sort of a goal for the paper. What when we talk about motivation of the research, we mean what's the starting point, what's the background work that has been done in this field. So a khetre, what could be motivation for the research when they talk about, let's see, sorry, here, so they you see this 6 here, they cite some other work that has been done in this field, or in this area of scientific research. And this would be a motivation for this research, that someone found out that this youthful secretion from young elephants leads to some mischievous and erratic behavior. On the other hand, when the elephants go older, it has a completely different smell. So why is that, and how does that affect the social interaction? That would be the motivation for this research. Do you want to add anything?
I want to add that I think people kind of mixed the first this article and kind of the part of the next. Someone mentioned Lake Baikal, so that's like a separate article. That's not related.
Well, that's fine. I think
you should have probably mentioned that, like, to ignore the last part, the second page.
But I think that's good. I think you guys did way better than I would have done at your age. So I'm not saying that's gold standard, but I'm saying it's much better than what I would have done. I think that's great. So whenever I don't think this only applies for scientific articles. Whenever you're reading anything that's remotely technical, try to analyze it in a similar manner. Try to understand the drawbacks, kothay fail hoteche, kothay they're succeeding, and break it down into a very algorithmic approach. Je etar pore eta porbo, etar pore eta porbo, etar pore eta back korte hobe, tarpor eta note korte hobe, tarpor eta likhte hobe. So when you start thinking like that, it's easier to grasp those ideas. That's it. That's it for me. Ekhon Shweti will take over. Do you want to stop the recording and start again?